Thank you for tuning in. This is DJ Bob Fresh from SegaShiro.com, your Sega resource, and today we're doing a video review of Thor, God of Thunder on the Nintendo DS. Developed by WayForward Technologies, this is a team that prides themselves on being able to resurrect classic intellectual properties with great 2D graphics. It shouldn't be any surprise then that they're the developers behind Contra 4 on the Nintendo DS and A Boy and His Blob for the Wii. They're also pretty known for their DSiWare title, Shantae's Risky Revenge. WayForward's Thor game does not quite live up to the legacy of some of those other titles that I mentioned, but it is a solid time waster. Now let me put that statement in context. Over the course of the 8 hours or so that I played Thor, I was quite often surprised at how much fun I was having. The combat system harkens back to the 16-bit era. This really feels like someone snuck a Genesis game into my DS. In general, most of the graphics and the art design is fantastic in the game. It really feels like a nice mix between the comic books and old 16-bit games from yesteryear. The graphics really make the best use out of both DS screens, as you really have battles that take place on both the bottom and top screen. On top of that, you get some huge boss fights that actually take up both screens as well. These can be pretty epic. However, there are some signs that this is a movie tie-in game, and elements that do feel rushed. One of these elements is Thor's animation to actually grab onto things over the course of the game. In some boss fights, it actually looks like he's grabbing nothing, and yet will still pick up the item that he's going to grab. Particularly in the end boss fight, there are times where the boss swings his head, and Thor is actually left in his animation, even though he's not grabbing onto anything. These kind of moments pull you out of the experience, but they're minor. Others might argue that the combat in the game is a little bit repetitive. If you played one level of Thor, you've technically played them all, except that isn't really fair, because the combat system is pretty nuanced. Thor employs a rune system, and each rune, which you collect and find throughout the missions, changes Thor's abilities. So you can create Thor in a way that you want to play him as. So if you want to juggle characters, you can do that. If you'd rather just throw Mjolnir, you can do that as well. It really helps to change up the gameplay, knowing that you can use different runes at any time. After you complete Thor, there's a couple of modes that you unlock. One is a survival mode where you just battle an onslaught of enemies, but the other is this mode where you can use other characters that you can't throughout the main mission. I really like to try out using characters like Loki and Sif to see how they differed from Thor. It's not the greatest or the biggest mode, but it is an interesting one. One aspect that really shines in Thor is the boss fights. They're big, they're fun. The first couple, I will say, are a little bit on the easy side, but it really ramps up towards the end. The controls in Thor are very, very nice and very, very tight. Within minutes of picking up the game, you'll be ready throwing enemies, bashing them up into the air, knocking them back down. The controls and the combat system really allow for some creative killing. Over the course of the game, you collect two types of orbs. One fills your health meter, the other one fills your magic meter. In terms of magic, you have thunder powers, you have lightning powers, and you have wind powers. And all of these are good at taking out a lot of enemies in a pinch. To utilize these, you just have to tap on the touchscreen. It's weird that they didn't map it to a button, but it works. In terms of sound design, that's one element of Thor that's maybe not as strong as the graphics or the controls. Generally, the music came off as a bit generic. The sound effects are all solid enough, but the music just seems kind of repetitive. Most of the storytelling throughout the game is told through these static cutscenes, and while the art is very nice for these scenes, it really sort of takes one hand from the movie and another from the comic book and sort of slams them together. The story itself is about as generic as the HD console version. It doesn't intrude on the game, and yet it's not really propelling you in any great fashion. Particularly the relationship between Loki and Thor leaves a lot to be desired. In the movies, Loki is a really interesting character. In this, he's pretty much relegated to just telling you where to go and maybe apologizing for when things go wrong. However, all things said, when comparing this to the movie and even to the Xbox 360 game, this is the version of Thor that I enjoyed the most out of all of those. Its real success is that it really feels like a classic beat-em-up from the 16-bit era. If you're looking for a solid brawler on the DS, or if you really need to play a Thor game, then this is the one that you need to check out. As a Marvel fan and as a Sega fan, I'm really hoping that the team can pull out more titles that play like this and not like some of their other efforts. This is DJ Fob Fresh signing out, saying keep on gaming.